So guys, let's start. So we're doing March 2018. Variant is 2. Let's start with the um, essay question first, and let's start with 4 because we were doing international trade yesterday. So let's just look at this question. So describe what is meant by a rise in an economy's terms of trade. Outline how a change in economy's exchange rate and its domestic price level might each cause this change to come about. That's the first question. And then the second part is whether a rise in economy's terms of trade is likely to be overall benefit to the economy. So let's discuss this question. This is a good one. Any question before we move on? So guys, I have actually also uploaded these recordings on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, they're also recorded. They are also uploaded there in terms of past papers, AS Economics past papers. Okay. So guys, the question is asking us, what is meant by a rise in economy's terms of trade. So you guys, we know that terms of trade is basically index of export prices over index of import prices times 100. In other words, it's the ratio of PX is to PM. So it's an index of export prices or index of import prices is your terms of trade, right? So first thing first is that we will give the formula, right? And then we talk about that change in your exchange rate can affect your terms of trade, because when the exchange rate goes down, for example, exports become cheaper, imports become expensive. And if you look at the formula of terms of trade is PX over PM. So imports become cheaper, exports become cheaper, imports become expensive. So your terms of trade will fall. So a weaker exchange rate can make the terms of trade to become worsen as well, right? So exchange rate is going down, guys. Sonia, exchange rate goes down, exports become cheaper, imports become expensive. No? They are saying change in economy's exchange rate, so that's why I took exchange rate going down. Right, guys? Do you agree? Oh, you want to show a rise in terms of trade? Sorry. A rise in terms of trade. You're right. For that, I need to do the opposite. So exchange rate goes up. Exports become expensive, imports become cheaper, and that will cause our terms of trade to worsen. So exports become expensive, imports become cheaper. Terms of trade will go up. So if you want the terms of trade to go up, you want the exchange rate to go up. You're right. Sorry, I didn't read this rise in exchange rate. And similarly, if you want the terms of trade to go up, what about inflation? If price level goes up, exports become expensive, imports become cheaper, and that will also cause the terms of trade to go up, right? So you want more inflation, and you also want strong exchange rate, right? Got it? So they are saying, describe what is meant by a rise in exchange rate terms of trade. Either there's one more thing that you can talk about. The rise in terms of trade would mean if PX is greater than PM, or rise in PX is greater than rise in PM, you will see the terms of trade to improve, right? And the value of terms of trade to rise. Why are you guys giving me other factors? some of you are giving me rise in productivity and other factors. They're not asking for other factors. Make sense? If lower domestic prices will decrease demand for imports, leading to lower imports prices, making the terms of trade to rise. No, lower domestic prices means exports are cheaper, imports are expensive. Terms of trade is only looking at prices, guys. It's not looking at anything else. When we say that inflation is going up, exports will become expensive, imports will become cheaper. So that's why terms of trade go up. So there is no quantity discussion. Make sense?
Sir, I have a question.
Won't we mention factors? No, because Munir, they're not saying yes. एक second, bacha. What I'm saying, Munir, we don't mention other factors because यहाँ पे दो factors दिए हुए उन्होंने आपको. Yes, what's your question?
Sir, I just checked the marking scheme of this question, and Smina, there is this point written that the keyword in this question is might. Price level might cause each of these to come about. So we need to mention, like there's one mark to mention why these changes will not cause terms of trade to rise. So उसमें क्या लिखेंगे?
Might each cause this to come about. Outline how a change in economy's exchange rate and its domestic price level might each cause this to come about. So we talk about how is this causing it to happen. Now the question is, might would basically mean that why you might need to talk about if there is a possibility of it may not to happen. So let's talk about why it may not happen, just to have that discussion also, because we've talked about why it would happen, but let's look at why it might not happen. So other reason why it might not happen could be because of, like if you look at inflation, if inflation is happening in your country, but if it's lower than trading partners, right, then your terms of trade may not worsen. Number one is that. So that's the counter argument, which is the might part, right? Also, when your exchange rate is going up, but it's still also again, like what if your exchange rate is going up, but it's also lower in terms of your trading partners, right? So that could also be a factor that could play a role. Or what if your exchange rate is going up, but at the same time, inflation is going down? So that could basically nullify the effect, right? Manail, when you say change in number of exports and imports too, what do you mean by that? So let me go back to the question. This guy describe what is meant by rise in economies terms of trade is fine. When export prices are rising faster than import prices, terms of trade will go up. And that will make the value of terms of trade to exceed probably 100. How a change in economy's exchange rate and its effects might cause this to come about. You can talk about how it will make it come about and talk about what if something else is happening at the same time, then nullify it, right? So also remember, terms of trade is all about prices. It's not about quantity. So that's why we may need to sort of make sure that we do not talk about the quantity part. Okay. Now let's talk about, are we good to move on? Yeah, we need to, so we need to mention some factors that can nullify it. Like if inflation is lower than trading partners, then you may not see the effect to be, then your prices are rising, but your terms of trade may not worsen because imports are also becoming more expensive, Also, in exchange rates, something similar could be mentioned. Are we good to move on now to the next part? Discuss whether a rise in economy's terms of trade is likely to be of overall benefit to the economy. So let's talk about benefits of terms of trade improving and cost of terms of trade improving. Okay, so guys, if the terms of trade goes up, let's talk about first improvement in the terms of trade. How will it be beneficial? Anyone? So first thing we mentioned in our notes that if terms of trade improve, this means less of exports to be given up for certain amount of imports. If your export prices are good, you may not need to give up too much of your exports. Number one is that. Another benefit is that if terms of trade is going up, exports are becoming expensive, and somebody is mentioning it, and demand is inelastic, how will it benefit, guys? Then this would mean your X minus M can also go up. If demand is inelastic and exports are becoming expensive, your exports revenue will go up, causing your X minus M to go up, which can in turn improve a country's balance of payment and therefore make it have stronger reserves. Right? So demand is inelastic. I should write for exports. Make sense? So if exports become expensive and demand is inelastic, yes, exchange rate can rise, but exchange rate rising may not really, it's more of a consequence than a benefit in itself. Right? Any other advantage that we can think of? Exports becoming expensive, imports becoming cheaper. Well, if imports are becoming cheaper, then you can say this, that key inputs can be available at low cost, and that can cause lower inflation. Maybe that's an effect that you can talk about. Yeah, cost of production goes down, low cost push inflation. That's a good point. I mean, and I would like to say the same thing. This, yeah, but जब हम positives की बात करें तो Madhya, we need to stop there. When we talk about cost of terms of trade, we'll talk about this also, right? Cheap imports, exactly. Rule, that's exactly. Now let's talk about the cost of terms of trade, guys. The cost of terms of trade is basically if the goods are elastic, then your X minus M can fall. And that could mean unemployment can happen, your GDP can fall, and so on. So that's the first disadvantage. The second disadvantage you can talk about is this, that exports are becoming expensive. So we lose our competitiveness, and that can hurt economy. Then we can also talk about this, the cause of the terms of trade going up matters, but what if the cause is inflation? Then that could be undesirable, right? Or if the cause is exchange rate going up, that could also mean undesirable, because you have a consequence. Because of this, you can run into what we call Current account deficit, exactly. So we need to know the cause of the terms of trade going up. If it's inflation, this could be not so desirable, or if the government decides to improve exchange rate without much thought, right? Imported inflation, why would that be the case? Yes, exactly. I wrote that, Madhya. If unemployment and GDP may fall. Make sense, guys? Now, give me a conclusion, guys. I want a conclusion from you guys. Tell me what conclusion would you write? Guys, take 2 minutes and tell me the conclusion. TOPT might be beneficial if the goods are inelastic. Okay, that's your conclusion. What else? If the goods, the benefit cost is dependent on the elasticity of demand. Ibrahim, exactly. If it's inelastic. So yeah, so we could talk about the elasticity matter in this case. Terms of trade improvement does not really signify much. If it's terms of trade improvement is alongside uh, balance of trade improvement, then this is a good sign the economy is doing well. However, if the terms of trade is happening alongside what you call it a decrease in your balance of trade, it may not be a good sign. So we need to link it with the balance of trade discussion, whether balance of trade is improving or not. Make sense? So that could be your conclusion. Good, guys. Let's look at now another question. 3A. Explain the way in which the economists measure how much the supply of a good changes as its price changes. This is basically price elasticity of supply, right? Which is percentage change in quantity supply over percentage change in price. It measures the responsiveness of quantity supply to a change in price. Isn't that true, guys? Now, tell me the two factors that can influence it. Guys, quickly, what are the two factors that can influence it? Cost of production, yes. So, yeah, so two things. Number one could be spare capacity. Somebody said unused capacity, spare capacity was one. Number two is mobility of factors of production, good job. Mobility of factor mobility, mobility of factors of production. Number three is ability to store, which is exactly perishable versus non-perishable. And number four was time period. The longer the time period, the more elastic will be the supply. So higher the spare capacity and more mobile the factors of production, more elastic will be supply, higher the ability to store, higher the elasticity of supply, longer the time period, higher will be the elasticity of supply. So good job, guys. So we mentioned the formula, we mentioned the definition, so on. Are we good? Questions? Okay. Discuss how supply side policies might increase the stock of capital goods and the quantity of labor supplied to an economy. Consider whether these policies will be effective for each of these factors of production. So how a supply side policy is being used to increase the stock of capital goods? Basically, better machinery and quantity of labor, so more workers. Okay. No, Amal, we don't include technology as a PES factor. Make sense? Amal did. Okay. So guys, what are supply side policies? Supply side policies are policies that are trying to improve the aggregate supply of the economy. So we can make a diagram like this one. If this is my AD, this is my aggregate supply. Aggregate supply can shift to the right, leading to lower price level, higher GDP, right? The lower price level, higher GDP, right? So they're saying when you do supply side policies, you are trying to basically make the aggregate supply curve go to the right, and that can result in not only lower price level, higher GDP. Now, you are trying to do two things, right? In the question they're saying how a supply policy might increase uh, the stock of capital goods. Guys, let's talk about stock of capital goods. So basically, stock of capital goods can be improved through the government, like encouraging firms to encouraging research and development, incentivizing firms to do research and development. Any other thing that they can do, guys? Let's first talk about capital goods only. Privatization can also do that, but let's talk about first how do you improve the stock of capital goods? Lower tariffs, very good, Hussain. Lower tariff. So just a minute, guys. Let me just charge my pencil. So lower tariffs on imported goods, higher subsidies, higher subsidies on capital goods can also be another way to go forward. Yeah, giving grants or subsidies. Also, so these are the ways the government can improve that. Yeah, there's only one graph needed. Don't worry about it. Providing incentives to the firms. What about how do you improve the second? How do you improve your quantity of labor? In terms of quantity of labor, guys, again, what we could do, the government can increase the retirement age. Very good. Let's talk about supply side policy. Education and training is one supply side policy, number one. Immigration laws or basically providing better housing schemes could be one which can increase the supply of labor. That's a good example. Any other factor that can make the supply to go up? So remember, this kind of supply side policies are basically trying to, both increase the quality and quantity of labor. Tax credits or even lower taxes can incentivize. Lower taxes is also a supply side policies that can improve the overall participation of labor, guys. Make sense? Now, conclusion for this one, guys. What's the conclusion that you will write? Anyone who can tell me the conclusion or evaluation? Some of the things that we can write here about evaluation, guys, could be supply side policies are expensive. They work only in the long run. And what else? They are a burden on the government and taxpayers. Very good. lead to short-term, very good job, Nadia. So in the short term, you might see inflation to happen, but in the long run, it may see its impact to happen. 25 to 30 years is too long a period you mentioned. I think at least 10 years that you require those policies to show its effect. Sadly, in Pakistan, that's two governments, and that's why we don't end up doing supply side policies, because the government always changes power. Make sense? What are you saying? PDF exports and imports should be, Munir, you don't need to mention this in this question. Wrong window, Munir. No, my friend. Martial learner comes in Jacob questions. Yeah, so what are the disadvantages? We've discussed okay, they work in the long run, they're expensive, and they may be a burden on the government. And somebody mentioned something else which yeah, in the short term, they can actually cause inflation to happen. From an equity, how is it a negative impact on equity or redistribution of income? Unless they reduce taxes, you can say that. Yeah, unless they reduce taxes, but not all supply side policies are trying to reduce taxes. Okay, guys, let's go to number 2. Explain how government face increasing opportunity costs in their decision making. Use the PPC to support your diagram. So opportunity cost is the next best alternative for gone. We'll write that. Government facing, various kind of sort of opportunity costs. It could be, expenditure on, let's say, health, or expenditure on education, or more of capital goods for them also, versus spending on, military goods could be another one. That could be another trade-off. Another trade-off the government can face. You can talk about explain how government face increasing opportunity costs in the decision. So and when you are looking at government sort of you need to make concave to the origin kind of a PPC, and you can write military versus non-military goods, and you can talk about how it's an increasing opportunity cost because resources are not perfectly mobile. And so we can make a diagram like this one. And you can see, right, capital versus military goods. For example, is it frozen? Why is it? It's not frozen, guys. Okay. Okay, guys. Does that make sense? Okay. Discuss whether decision making is more effective when, by the way, when you're writing an answer like this one, you're talking about defining PPC as well. I didn't already talk about it. You define PPC, you talk about what does PPC represent, what are the assumptions of PPC, talk about what is opportunity cost, talk about what does it look like for a government to have in terms of its option. And as you move from, let's say, A to B, why the opportunity cost is increasing in this scenario. Okay, now B part is discuss whether decision making is more effective when undertaken by governments. in a planned economy rather than by individuals in a free market. This is very easy. You talk about in a planned economy, the government is taking decisions, it's centralized decision making. It doesn't use the market forces of demand supply. There are advantages of this. Market failures are none. There is also government is having takes the national goals under account, take it into account. I mean, take it under consideration, and as a result, decision making seems to be more responsible. One could argue. However, there are problems. There could be shortages or surpluses. The economy has inefficiency. It doesn't have incentives which are aligned, and as a result, you could end up in a case where productions are not at an ideal level, and you need a big government to allocate resources, which could be problematic. Individuals, when they in a free market economy, which uses market for demand supply, has its advantages and disadvantages. The big advantage is that markets are very quick to respond to consumer needs. Also, they're less likely to be shortages and surpluses. Market works automatically. There's no need for government intervention, and so on. You don't need to write means tested, but you can say the government in a planned economy uh, focus on equity, how resources can be allocated in a more fair manner. Consumer sovereignty is an advantage also. Consumers are free to decide how to allocate resources. What, how, and from whom to produce is done through consumers' choices. But then we talk about, like whether decision making is more effective or not. And what is your view about? Clearly, decision making is less effective. Some in planned economy because of the mere size of the economy. The larger the economy, the more complex is the plan, and the more complex is the decision making, the more mistakes we are likely to do. And that is one reason why over time we are seeing less of planned economies and more of economies that are using market forces of demand supply. Make sense, guys? So we talk about this. Any questions, guys? Yeah, Narayan, you can take a middle ground and say that both systems have their failures, or both systems have their drawbacks, and as a result, a mixed economy that takes into account the advantages of both could be a good way to go forward, because in a mixed economy, you have some sectors which are run by the market forces of demand supply and other by government intervention. So that could be written here. In a 12 mark, can we ever refer to an example point we mentioned, Pate? No, I don't think so. Don't do that. Yes, that's a good point also. Market economy will only make those goods which are profitable, and merit goods. And so market failure, you mentioned about market failure that can happen in a free market economy. Yeah. Okay, guys, I'm going to end on this note. I'm feeling a bit tired. I will do the other part tomorrow. So you need to excuse me for that. Okay. So which year is this? This is 18, March 2018. It's a bit complicated, this paper. It's not a straightforward paper, but nonetheless, good to practice.